My grandmother's son falsely accused me and I was arrested. Now the truth has come out and she is begging me to drop the charges. A man, aged 39, finds himself drawn into a transformative relationship with Emma, a 35-year-old single mother. From the moment they met, Emma seemed like the ideal partner. She radiated warmth and affection, and her life revolved around her 7-year-old son, Tom. As the man entered their lives, he brought stability and resources that Emma seemed to deeply appreciate. Early in their relationship, he stepped into the role of not just Emma's boyfriend but also a steady figure for Tom. He wasn't just present, he was invested. From helping with school projects to attending parent-teacher meetings in Emma's absence, he started integrating into their small family unit. Emma often expressed gratitude, showering him with affection and calling him her rock, especially when times were hard. Tom, initially shy, began warming up to the man as well. At first, their interactions were limited. Tom would respond with one-word answers or retreat to his room when the man visited. But over time, things changed. They bonded over little things, building Lego sets, reading bedtime stories, and playing catch in the park. The man took pride in the growing connection, particularly the day Tom, with a shy smile, started calling him Dad. It was a milestone that filled him with joy and hope for their future as a family. The man supported Emma in every possible way. Emma, who had been juggling a demanding job while raising Tom, now had someone to share her burdens. He took care of things that had been stressors for her, paying off overdue bills, funding Tom's extracurricular activities, and even planning family outings. Emma often said she felt safe for the first time in years, and she credited him with bringing joy back into her life. Emma's friends and family were charmed by him, too. At family gatherings, he was the center of praise, a man willing to step up and take care of a single mother and her child, a role many might have hesitated to embrace. Emma's mother often commented, "You've found a keeper," while friends teased Emma about how lucky she was. The relationship seemed perfect on the surface. They made plans for a shared future, even discussing marriage. Emma showed her appreciation through acts of love and small gestures, like cooking his favorite meals or leaving sweet notes in his bag. It all felt natural, as though they had always been a family. The man's friends occasionally expressed concern, worried that he was diving headfirst into a situation that might not turn out as ideal as it seemed. But he brushed off their comments, convinced that he had found the life he had been searching for. After all, Tom wasn't just someone else's child anymore. He was family. And Emma? She was everything he could have hoped for in a partner, caring, supportive, and devoted. He didn't mind the sacrifices he made for them. Selling his bachelor pad to move closer to Emma's place, adjusting his social life to accommodate her schedule, and even passing up a promotion at work to spend more time with her and Tom, all these things felt worth it. Every time he saw Tom smile or heard Emma tell him how much she appreciated him, it solidified his belief that he was doing the right thing. Still, there were moments of tension, though minor. Occasionally, Emma would seem distant or overly protective of Tom when it came to certain things, like disciplining him or setting boundaries. Whenever the man tried to step in as a parental figure, Emma would gently remind him that Tom was her responsibility. While he accepted this, it left him feeling unsure about his role. Yet, these were fleeting thoughts, quickly overshadowed by the life they were building together. Emma often reassured him, saying, "You're the best thing that's ever happened to us," and he believed her. He had no reason not to. Their dynamic also evolved as Tom grew more attached. Tom, who had once hesitated to let anyone in, now wanted to spend every moment with him. He would run up to him after school, eager to share stories about his day, or ask for help with homework he found challenging. The man felt a deep sense of fulfillment every time Tom referred to him as Dad, and Emma's soft smile during those moments made it all the more special. On weekends, the three of them began establishing family traditions: movie nights, pancake breakfasts, and visits to the local zoo. They even started talking about getting a dog, something Tom had been asking for ever since he could speak. Emma, who had been hesitant about the idea, eventually warmed up to it, saying it might be a great way to cement their bond as a family. From the outside, their life looked idyllic. Emma, Tom, and the man formed a picture-perfect family. Neighbors would often compliment them on how happy they seemed, and even strangers occasionally mistook the man for Tom's biological father. He never corrected them. In his heart, he was Tom's dad, and that was all that mattered. But beneath the surface, the man occasionally wrestled with insecurities. While he adored Emma and Tom, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was investing more into the relationship than Emma was. Though she often expressed her gratitude, there were times when her affection felt performative, as though she were playing a role rather than expressing genuine love. He dismissed these thoughts as paranoia, chalking them up to his own fears of inadequacy. The man never spoke of these feelings though. To him, the risks were worth it. Emma had been through so much, raising a child on her own and juggling the challenges of single parenthood. If she was guarded, it was only because life had taught her to be cautious. He convinced himself that his patience and unwavering support would eventually earn her full trust. As for Tom, he never doubted the boy's love for him. When Tom beamed with pride while introducing him to his friends as "my dad," or when he hugged him tightly after a long day, it erased any lingering doubts. The man poured his heart into being the father figure he never had, and Tom's affection felt like the ultimate reward. Looking at Emma and Tom, the man felt he had finally found a purpose. His life, once marked by solitary achievements and fleeting relationships, now had meaning. He was no longer living for himself, but for the family he had come to cherish. Little did he know, the foundation he had built his happiness upon was not as solid as it seemed. As the months passed, Emma began to show a side of herself that the man hadn't fully seen before. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly, as small changes in her behavior. At first, it was little questions about his day at work, inquiries about how his projects were going, and playful jokes about how she could help him stay organized. He didn't think much of it. In fact, he welcomed her interest, seeing it as a sign that she cared deeply about him and their future together. But soon, Emma's questions took a slightly different tone. She began to express a growing interest in his finances. At first, it came across as harmless curiosity. "How do you keep track of all your accounts?" she asked one evening while he was paying bills on his laptop. "You must be so disciplined to stay on top of everything." He chuckled, shrugging it off. "It's just about staying organized," he replied. "I use a few apps, keep a spreadsheet. Nothing too complicated." Emma leaned in, her tone light and affectionate. "You're so good at this. I'd be a mess if I had to handle everything on my own." Her words were flattering, and he felt a small sense of pride. He didn't see any harm when she followed up with, "Maybe one day you could show me how you do it? You know, in case I ever need to help out." He smiled at her. "Sure. But I doubt you'd ever need to worry about this stuff. I've got it covered." Over time, Emma's interest grew less casual. She began asking specific questions. Questions that seemed innocuous at first but carried a certain weight when pieced together. "Do you use the same password for all your accounts?" she asked one evening while they were watching TV. "It's so much easier, isn't it? I mean, who can remember a dozen different passwords?" The man laughed, shaking his head. "No, I keep them all different. It's safer that way." Emma tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "You're so smart. I just forget them all. Do you write them down somewhere? Or maybe keep them saved on your laptop?" "Not exactly," he replied, feeling a slight discomfort he couldn't quite explain. "I have a system." Her interest didn't stop there. Emma began asking to borrow his laptop for small tasks. "Tom spilled juice on my tablet," she explained one morning, holding the device with a resigned sigh. "Can I use yours for a bit? I just need to send a few emails." "Of course," he said, handing it over without hesitation. It was just a laptop, after all. What harm could there be in letting her use it? At first, it seemed innocent enough. Emma would use the laptop for short periods, always thanking him profusely and returning it without issue. But then, he began to notice small changes. His browser history would show searches he hadn't made, and some of his accounts would prompt him to confirm logins from devices he didn't recognize. He dismissed it as glitches or coincidences, convincing himself there was no reason to be suspicious. But Emma's behavior continued to evolve. She started memorizing details about his life in a way that felt almost clinical. She would casually drop his passwords into conversations, laughing as if it were a joke. "Oh, I remembered your Netflix password the other day," she said with a grin. "It's that same one you use for your work emails, right? You're so predictable." The man laughed along, brushing off the unease that was beginning to creep in. "You've got a sharp memory," he said, trying to keep things light. Emma didn't stop there. She began suggesting that they consolidate their finances. "It would make things so much easier," she said one evening over dinner. "I mean, we're practically living as a family already. Why not open a joint account for the bills and groceries? It's more efficient that way." The man hesitated, unsure how to respond. He trusted Emma, of course, she had been nothing but supportive and loving. But something about the suggestion gave him pause. "I don't know," he said carefully. "I think we're doing fine as we are. No need to rush into anything." Emma didn't push, at least not directly. She simply smiled and said, "Of course. I just thought it might help us feel even more like a team." Outside of their home life, Emma began to cultivate a positive image for herself in the man's professional world. She started visiting him at work, always under the guise of bringing him lunch or surprising him with coffee. His colleagues adored her, charmed by her warm demeanor and her apparent dedication to supporting him. "You've got to keep her," one coworker told him with a grin. "She's amazing." He couldn't disagree. Emma had a way of making everyone feel at ease, and her visits always seemed perfectly timed, never intrusive, always welcome. But over time, her presence at his workplace grew more frequent. She would strike up conversations with his colleagues, asking about his role in the company and showing a keen interest in his project. "You're such a hard worker," she told him one day after leaving his office. "Everyone has so much respect for you. I'm so proud." The praise felt genuine, but there was an underlying intensity to her interest that he couldn't ignore. She was building a picture of his world, piece by piece, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how much she knew about him, his habits, his routines, his finances. It wasn't just love or admiration. It was something deeper, something calculated. Still, the man pushed these thoughts aside, unwilling to question the woman he loved. Emma had never given him a reason to doubt her, and her actions, though unusual, always seemed rooted in care and affection. She made him feel valued, appreciated, and needed. She was perfect, or at least she seemed to be. But as the days went on, the small moments of unease began to pile up. Emma's requests for access to his life grew more direct. "Can I borrow your laptop again?" she asked one evening, holding out her hand expectantly. "I need to look something up for Tom's school project." "Sure," he said, handing it over with a smile. But as he watched her type, a nagging thought tugged at the back of his mind. Why did she need his laptop so often? Why couldn't she use her own devices? Emma's behavior wasn't just confined to their home. She started showing an uncanny ability to anticipate his needs and wants. She would bring up things he hadn't mentioned, like a specific financial goal he had been considering or a detail about a conversation he had with a friend. "You're amazing," she would say, her tone dripping with admiration. "I just want to make sure everything in your life runs smoothly." At first, he saw it as a testament to how much she cared. But as her interest in his world became more intense, the line between affection and intrusion began to blur. He found himself questioning things he had never questioned before, wondering if her love was as selfless as it seemed, or if there was something else driving her actions. Humiliation began to creep into the edges of their relationship, though the man couldn't quite articulate why. Emma's charm and warmth masked something deeper, something that left him feeling exposed in ways he couldn't explain. He began to wonder if the life he had built with her was as solid as he had believed, or if he was simply a piece in a game he didn't understand. It was a day that started like any other. The man arrived at work early, as he always did, eager to tackle his tasks and immerse himself in the familiarity of his routine. He greeted his coworkers with a warm smile, oblivious to the storm about to erupt and shatter the life he had so meticulously built. Just before lunch, as he reviewed a project in his office, he heard a knock at the door. It was firm and authoritative, unlike the casual knocks of his colleagues. When he looked up, 2 uniformed police officers stood in the doorway, their faces solemn. A murmur spread through the nearby cubicles as employees craned their necks, whispering to one another. "Are you his name?" one of the officers asked. He nodded, his stomach tightening. "Yes, that's me. Is something wrong?" The officer stepped forward, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "We have a warrant for your arrest." The man blinked, utterly confused. "What? Arrest? There must be some mistake." Before he could finish, one officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs while the other began reciting his right. "You have the right to remain silent." The words seemed to blur together, the world tilting on its axis. His heart pounded as he stammered, "This has to be some kind of misunderstanding. What am I being arrested for?" The officer's answer hit him like a freight train. "You're being charged with child endangerment and causing harm to Tom," Emma's last name. He froze, disbelief coursing through him. Tom? Harm? The accusations made no sense. He adored that boy. He had spent months helping him with homework, attending his school events, and doing everything in his power to be a good father figure. His co-workers watched in stunned silence as he was escorted out of the building, handcuffed and humiliated. The murmurs turned into audible gasps. Some reached for their phones, likely recording the scene. His manager, a normally jovial man, stood frozen, his expression torn between shock and pity. The man's mind raced as they led him out of the office and into a waiting police car. He pleaded with the officers, his voice shaky and desperate. "There's been a mistake. I've never hurt Tom. I love him like he's my own son. Please talk to Emma, she'll tell you this is all wrong." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The officers remained silent, their faces unreadable. At the station, He was fingerprinted and photographed for a mugshot. The sterile environment, with its harsh fluorescent lighting, only heightened his sense of panic and despair. He was placed in a cold, cramped holding cell with strangers who eyed him suspiciously. The walls seemed to close in as he replayed the officer's words over and over in his mind. Child endangerment. Tom. Why would anyone accuse him of such a thing? Hours later, during his initial hearing, the full weight of the situation began to dawn on him. The prosecutor presented a grim picture, stating that there was evidence of injuries on Tom that Emma had allegedly reported were caused by him. His stomach churned as the accusations were read aloud, each one more outrageous than the last. Bruises on Tom's arms. Emotional distress. Allegations that the man had been overly strict and even physically aggressive. He wanted to scream. He wanted to fight back, to demand to know where these lies had come from. But his lawyer, a public defender assigned to him last minute, advised him to remain quiet. "We'll fight this," the lawyer whispered, though the man found little comfort in those words. The judge granted him bail, but the conditions were devastating. He was prohibited from contacting Emma or Tom in any way. A restraining order was issued, barring him from going near their home, Tom's school, or even mutual acquaintances. To make matters worse, his bank accounts were frozen pending further investigation, leaving him without access to his funds. By the time he walked out of the courthouse, the man was a shadow of himself. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from coworkers, friends, and family, some expressing confusion, others outright condemnation. His name was already making the rounds on social media, accompanied by headlines like, "Local man accused of abusing stepchild." The fallout was swift and brutal. His employer, not wanting to be associated with someone under such serious allegations, terminated his contract within hours. Friends he had known for years began to distance themselves, their once friendly texts replaced with awkward silence or curt messages. One particular call, from a close friend of his, stung the most. "Look, man," his friend said hesitantly, "I don't know what's true or not, but I can't have my family around you right now. You understand, right?" The man hung up without replying, his hands trembling. He sat in his tiny apartment, which now felt oppressively quiet. The home he had once shared with Emma and Tom was off limits, his belongings left behind without a chance to retrieve them. He had nothing but the clothes on his back and the suffocating weight of the accusations against him. Humiliation became a constant companion. Neighbors whispered as he walked by, their gazes full of suspicion. Parents at the local park pointed him out, tugging their children closer as if he were some kind of monster. He avoided eye contact, his head hanging low, but the shame clung to him like a second skin. As he tried to piece together what had happened, his mind kept circling back to Emma. She had to know these accusations were false. She had to know he would never hurt Tom. Yet she hadn't reached out to defend him or clarify the situation. Was she being manipulated? Pressured? Or worse, was she behind this? Doubt crept in, poisoning his thoughts. He replayed every conversation, every moment with Emma, searching for signs he might have missed. Her sudden interest in his finances. The way she had memorized his passwords. The push for joint accounts. Had it all been part of a plan? The man couldn't shake the memory of Tom calling him Dad for the first time. The boy's smile, his trust, it had felt so real. How could it have come to this? Weeks turned into months, and his life continued to unravel. With no access to his accounts, he struggled to afford basic necessities. His lawyer worked tirelessly to build a defense, but the odds seemed stacked against him. Emma's testimony, combined with the alleged evidence of Tom's injuries, painted a damning picture. Every day, the man woke up to the same gnawing questions. Why? Why would Emma do this? Why would she let this happen? The humiliation deepened with each passing day. His face appeared on the evening news, his name forever tainted. The life he had worked so hard to build, his career, his reputation, his relationships, was in shambles. He was alone, trapped in a nightmare he couldn't escape. The man couldn't decide what hurt more, the betrayal, the loss of everything he'd held dear, or the gnawing fear that the people he loved most had orchestrated his downfall. Weeks after the arrest, the man's life remained a desolate wreck. With his reputation ruined, no job, and barely enough money to scrape by after borrowing from the few remaining friends who hadn't abandoned him, he began to lose hope. Every glance in the mirror reflected a version of himself he barely recognized, gaunt, hollow-eyed, and utterly defeated. He spent his days shuffling between his lawyer's office and his cramped, unfamiliar apartment, obsessively replaying the moments leading up to his downfall. How had everything fallen apart so quickly? Then, one afternoon, his phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. For a moment, He hesitated, dreading another voicemail full of vitriol or judgment. Against his better instincts, he answered. Hello? His voice was weak, almost unrecognizable to himself. A trembling voice came through the line. Dad? The word stopped him cold. It was Tom. His heart pounded as a mix of relief and dread washed over him. He wasn't supposed to have any contact with the boy, it was a direct violation of the court's orders, but the desperation in Tom's voice rooted him in place. Tom? How are you calling me? I stole Mom's phone while she was napping, Tom admitted quickly, his words tumbling out in a panicked rush. I have to tell you something. I lied. Mom made me lie. The man's breath caught in his throat. What are you talking about, Tom? She told me to say you hurt me, Tom confessed, his voice cracking. But you didn't. I didn't want to say it, Dad, but she got so mad when I said no. She said we'd lose everything if I didn't. She said you'd leave us? Tears welled in the man's eyes as Tom's words pierced through him like daggers. Tom, it's okay, he managed, though his voice trembled. You're just a kid. None of this is your fault. Tom sniffled on the other end of the line. It wasn't you, Dad. It was Danny. Mom's nephew. He pushed me when we were playing and I fell down the stairs. That's where the bruises came from. The man felt a flash of anger and disbelief. Danny, the arrogant, troublemaking teenager who always seemed to stir up chaos at family gatherings, had done this? And Emma had covered it up? Tom, are you safe right now? He asked, his voice urgent. I think so, Tom whispered. But Mom's been acting weird. She's always on her computer or her phone, and she keeps talking about money. Before the man could say more, Tom abruptly said, I have to go, and hung up. The man sat frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. He immediately called his lawyer, relaying everything Tom had said. This could change everything, his lawyer said, a newfound energy in his voice. If we can get Tom's testimony and prove the injuries were caused by someone else, we can start unraveling this. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of revelations. Tom's brave confession led investigators to question Danny, who crumbled under pressure and admitted to the incident. Danny, who had been visiting Emma at the time, had pushed Tom during a heated game. The injuries had been an accident, but Emma, ever calculating, had seen an opportunity. The investigation into Emma unearthed a web of deceit so vast it left the man reeling. For months, possibly longer, she had been siphoning money from his accounts. She had memorized his passwords, just as he'd dismissed as harmless. She had used his personal information to take out loans in his name, loans he'd never authorized or even been aware of. But the most humiliating betrayal was the discovery that she had tried to refinance his house without his knowledge. The property he had worked so hard to own, the home he had thought would one day shelter their family, had nearly been signed away under her control. The man was called to a meeting with his lawyer, who laid out the evidence against Emma. There were email trails, forged documents, and digital transfers leading straight back to her. She used everything you gave her, his lawyer said grimly, sliding a folder across the table. Your trust, your kindness, your resources, it was all part of her plan. The man flipped through the documents, his stomach churning with every new piece of evidence. There were fake signatures, falsified applications, and even correspondence between Emma and her accomplices. She had painted him as a negligent, abusive partner in those communications, justifying her actions to others as a desperate bid to protect herself and Tom. But what hurt the most were the details of how she had betrayed him so thoroughly. The times she had pretended to be the perfect partner, showing up at his workplace to build her image with his colleague. The moments she had shared laughter and warmth with him, all while plotting to dismantle his life. The humiliation he had felt before, being arrested in front of his co-workers, becoming the subject of gossip and disdain, now paled in comparison to the deeper betrayal. He had loved her, trusted her with everything, and she had repaid him with deceit. The court case turned in his favor after Tom's testimony, and the mountain of evidence against Emma came to light. The charges of child endangerment were dropped, and his accounts were slowly unfrozen. But the damage to his reputation and his spirit remained. As Emma's lies unraveled, the man began to see the full extent of her manipulation. She hadn't just stolen his money, she had stolen his sense of security, his belief in the goodness of the life they had built together. Emma was arrested and charged with fraud, theft, and perjury, but even as she was led away in handcuffs, the man felt no satisfaction. The scars she had left ran too deep to be healed by her downfall. Tom, though shaken, remained the one bright spot in the man's life. The boy's bravery in coming forward had saved him, and the man vowed to be there for him, no matter what. But even as he began to rebuild, the weight of what Emma had done lingered. He had given her everything, his trust, his love, his life. and she had turned it all into a weapon, leaving him to pick up the pieces of a life he no longer recognized. Emma's arrest was a spectacle that drew widespread attention. The woman who had played the role of the perfect partner and loving mother was now exposed as a manipulative con artist. When the police took her into custody, she was defiant, clinging to the last remnants of her mask. "This is a mistake," she screamed as cameras flashed. "I'm innocent." But the evidence against her was overwhelming, and the courtroom was packed during her trial. The man attended every session, determined to see justice served. Emma sat in the defendant's chair, her face a mixture of anger and feigned fragility. She tried to spin her lies even then, painting herself as a victim who had acted out of desperation. But witness after witness dismantled her story. It wasn't just his case. During the investigation, it came to light that Emma had done this before, several times in fact. She had used different aliases and various versions of her scheme to prey on vulnerable men, stealing their money and their trust. Her victims ranged from a widower she had convinced to hand over his life savings to a young entrepreneur whose fledgling business she had nearly destroyed. Each testimony was another nail in the coffin of her defense. The man watched as these other victims recounted their stories, their humiliation and betrayal mirroring his own. It was both validating and excruciating to hear how Emma had honed her tactics over the years. She had studied her targets carefully, using charm and deceit to worm her way into their lives, only to leave devastation in her wake. When the sentence was handed down, 4 years in prison for fraud, identity theft, and perjury, Emma's facade finally cracked. She cried in the courtroom, not out of remorse but out of the realization that her manipulations had failed. For the man, it wasn't a victory. It was simply the end of one chapter in a story that had already cost him so much. As Emma was taken away, Tom's future became the next pressing matter. The boy, now traumatized and grappling with the weight of what his mother had done, was placed with his biological father. Though the man had never met Tom's father, he was reassured to learn that the father had stepped up to the plate, enrolling Tom in therapy and working to provide him with stability. Letting go of Tom was perhaps the hardest part. Despite everything, the man still loved the boy as if he were his own. They had shared moments of genuine connection, moments that couldn't be erased by Emma's deceit. Tom's therapist recommended limited contact for now, allowing the boy time to adjust and heal. The man respected that, even though it left a hollow ache in his chest. Still, he made sure Tom knew he wasn't alone. He wrote him letters, telling him how proud he was of his bravery and how he would always be there if Tom ever needed him. In one of his first therapy sessions, Tom told his counselor, "I wish he was my real dad." It was a bittersweet moment, one that gave the man solace while underscoring the loss of the bond they had shared. While Tom worked toward healing, the man began his own process of rebuilding. One of his first steps was taking legal action against his former employer. The wrongful termination he had suffered after his arrest had left him not only unemployed but also publicly humiliated. He had spent years building his career, earning the trust and respect of his colleagues, only to have it all stripped away without due process. The lawsuit was grueling, dredging up memories of the day he was handcuffed and paraded out of his office. But this time, he was armed with the truth. His legal team presented the case meticulously, demonstrating how the company had acted prematurely, severing ties without waiting for the full facts to emerge. The trial wasn't just about the money, it was about reclaiming his dignity. When the verdict came in, awarding him a substantial compensation package, it felt like a small measure of justice. The funds allowed him to pay off the debts Emma had saddled him with and begin considering a fresh start. But more importantly, the ruling restored his sense of worth. His name, though still marred by whispers in certain circles, was officially cleared. As the dust settled, the man faced the daunting task of figuring out what came next. The life he had envisioned, a family with Emma and Tom, a future filled with love and purpose, was gone. What remained was a fractured version of himself, piecing together a new identity from the ruins of the old. Every step forward was tinged with reminders of the past. His empty home, once filled with laughter and the sound of Tom's small footsteps, now echoed with silence. The neighborhood, where he had once been greeted warmly by neighbors who admired his devotion to Emma and Tom, now felt cold and distant. People still stared when they saw him, their eyes filled with curiosity or judgment. But he refused to let the shame define him. He began volunteering at local organizations, using his free time to help others who had been victims of scams and betrayal. Sharing his story, though painful, became a way to connect with people who understood his pain. As for Emma, she remained defiant even behind bars. Reports from the prison indicated that she continued to blame others for her actions, refusing to take accountability. but her grip on his life had finally been severed. The man no longer checked the news for updates about her, no longer allowed her shadow to linger over his days. Tom's father occasionally sent updates about the boy's progress, sharing small victories like improved grades or breakthroughs in therapy. Knowing that Tom was safe and on the path to recovery was enough for now. The man didn't need immediate closure. He simply wanted the boy to find happiness, even if it meant watching from afar. In time, the man began to rebuild his career, taking a new job in a different city where he could start fresh. It wasn't easy. Trust didn't come as readily as it once had, and he found himself second-guessing people's motives. But he also discovered a strength within himself, a resilience forged in the fire of his ordeal. He carried the scars of Emma's betrayal, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as a reminder of what he had endured and what he had overcome. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, he faced it with a quiet determination, knowing that the worst was behind him and that he had the power to shape whatever came next. Relocating to a new city felt like stepping into an entirely different world. The man left behind the echoes of his old life, the whispered rumors, the pitying glances, and the haunting memories of betrayal. This was his chance to start fresh, to leave behind the humiliation that had followed him like a shadow. But even in this new place, he carried the weight of everything he had endured, the scars invisible but deeply etched into his heart. His first days in the new city were lonely. The apartment he rented was small, sparsely furnished, and eerily quiet. At night, the silence pressed against him, amplifying the doubts that still lingered. Could he truly rebuild after everything that had happened? Could he find joy again, or was he destined to carry the burden of Emma's betrayal forever? Determined to push forward, he threw himself into his plans to start a business. It wasn't easy. His savings, depleted by the legal battles and the debts Emma had left in her wake, forced him to start small. But if there was one thing he had learned from his ordeal, it was how to persevere. He rented a modest office space and began laying the groundwork for a consulting firm. Using the expertise he had built over years in his previous career, he set his sights on helping small businesses navigate challenges and find stability, something he now understood all too well. Starting from scratch brought its own kind of humiliation. Once a respected professional with a promising career, he now had to fight for every client, making cold calls and knocking on doors like an eager novice. Many days, he went home empty-handed, his confidence battered. But he reminded himself that this was just the beginning. He had rebuilt his life before. He could do it again. Amid the grind of starting his business, he found solace in an unexpected place, a rescue shelter on the edge of town. On a whim one weekend, he decided to visit, thinking that a pet might help fill the void in his life. As he walked past rows of barking dogs, one caught his eye, a scruffy, medium-sized mutt with patches of fur missing and a wary expression. The shelter worker explained that the dog, named Max, had been abandoned and was slow to trust people. The man knelt down, looking into Max's uncertain eyes, and saw a reflection of himself, wounded, hesitant, and in need of a second chance. "I'll take him," he said, despite the worker's cautious warnings that Max might take time to adjust. Bringing Max home was a challenge. The dog was skittish, flinching at sudden movements and retreating to corners when approached too quickly. But the man was patient, coaxing Max out with treats and quiet words. Over weeks, Max began to warm to him, following him from room to room and curling up at his feet as he worked late into the night. Max became more than just a pet, he was a lifeline. On days when the man felt the familiar weight of shame creeping back in, Max's wagging tail or playful bark reminded him that life could still hold moments of joy. Together, they established routines. Morning walks through the park, evenings spent tossing a worn tennis ball, and quiet nights where Max would rest his head on the man's lap as he read. The companionship Max provided didn't just lift his spirits, it also helped him connect with others. On their daily walks, neighbors began stopping to chat, drawn in by Max's scrappy charm. Slowly, the man started building new relationships, forming bonds with people who saw him not as a victim or a man with a tarnished past, but as someone kind and resilient. Meanwhile, his business began to grow. Word spread about his dedication and expertise, and clients who had initially hesitated to take a chance on him started referring him to others. Each new project brought a sense of accomplishment, chipping away at the self-doubt that had plagued him. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of pride, not in what he had survived, but in what he was building. Still, reminders of the past occasionally resurfaced. An old coworker reached out one day, apologizing for having distanced themselves during the height of the scandal. "I didn't know what to believe back then," they admitted, their voice heavy with regret. The man accepted the apology, though it left him feeling raw. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't just for others. It was something he needed to grant himself as well. Letters from Tom continued to arrive sporadically. The boy, now living a more stable life with his biological father, shared updates about his progress in therapy, his new hobbies, and his dreams for the future. Each letter was a bittersweet reminder of the bond they had shared, but also a source of comfort. Tom was healing, and that was enough. One day, Tom included a drawing in his letter, a simple sketch of the man and Max with the words, "Best Dad Ever" scrawled underneath. The man stared at it for a long time, tears blurring his vision. It was a reminder that despite everything Emma had done, the love he and Tom had shared had been real. As the seasons changed, so did the man. He began to let go of the humiliation that had once defined him, replacing it with a quiet strength. The lessons he had learned, about resilience, trust, and self-worth, became the foundation of the life he was building. He no longer saw himself as a victim of Emma's schemes, but as someone who had survived and grown stronger because of them. He expanded his business, hiring a small team and mentoring young professionals who reminded him of himself in his earlier days. Giving back became a way to reclaim his sense of purpose, and he found fulfillment in helping others achieve their goals. His firm became known not just for its success, but for its integrity, a reputation he worked hard to earn and protect. Through it all, Max remained by his side, a constant source of support. On difficult days, when doubts crept in or old wounds threatened to reopen, Max's unwavering loyalty reminded him of the progress he had made. Together, they carved out a life that, while far from perfect, was richer and more meaningful than he could have imagined. The man still thought of Tom often, wondering if their paths would cross again someday. But for now, he focused on the present, on the new life he had created. The scars of the past remained, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as a testament to his strength, a reminder that even in the face of betrayal and loss, it was possible to rebuild, to heal, and to find joy again.